Sure, please go ahead.
Okay, then welcome everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. I hope you're well, wherever you are. Before I introduce myself, I'd like to let you know we have interpretation into French and Spanish. So do please click on the globe icon at the lower part of your Zoom window and select a language, and that will enable you to receive the simultaneous translation. And please do feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. My name is Richard Baldwin. I'm a land administration specialist. I've worked in quite a few countries in the last 3 decades or so, and I'm also a member of the Land Portal Foundation Board, in fact. I welcome you to this webinar with the title of Exploring Sustainable Financing of Land Registration and Land Governance. My role today is to act as moderator. So I'll be introducing the session, the panel, and then asking the panelists a series of questions about their experiences, and we're then planning to take questions at the end of the discussion. By way of introduction, financial sustainability of land services remains a major challenge in the pursuit of effective and inclusive land governance. Many land administration systems still rely on external funding, which limits their ability to scale and sustain operations independently. In this webinar, we will explore innovative financing mechanisms, including self-financing, contributory models. We'll identify pathways towards resilient, locally owned, and equitable land administration systems. This topic is possibly even more important now. We are seeing reductions in donor-driven development financing. In the past, we've had large land programs funded by international donors, but will that continue, given the events of what's happened so far this year? Do we need to focus more on alternative ways of financing and give this more importance? Today, we're going to hear from people actively working on developing and implementing sustainable finance mechanisms in different countries. So we're going to get some real experience hear about real experiences that are taking place now in different countries. We'll also consider how open and transparent land data and information systems can enhance financial sustainability and improve the efficiency, accountability, and hopefully revenue generation. I'm really excited to hear from our esteemed panelists as they share their insights and experience on this really important topic. But just before we start, a couple of logistic notes. The webinar is being streamed live on multiple platforms. If you have questions, do please post them using the Q&A button. The Q&A button is at the bottom of your screen, and we will answer them later in the webinar. If you wish to address that to a particular panelist, the panelist will become clear in a minute or two, please do indicate who. Finally, in the interest of transparency, I should add that today's session is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the video afterwards. There'll also be an article prepared by the Land Portal. Allow me to introduce our speakers now. I'm joined by a terrific panel. I'm just going to describe them very briefly and then introduce them and ask them to speak as we start the actual discussion. We're delighted to have with us this afternoon, my time, Hema Betsema, a senior program advisor for Land at Scale in the Netherlands Enterprise Agency, and she's responsible for projects in Iraq and Palestine. She's also responsible for program-wide knowledge management and monitoring and evaluation. Hema has worked on land governance programming mainly in sub-Saharan Africa and the MENA region for over 10 years. We are joined also by Sarah Akilang, a technical advisor working with GIZ Uganda and supporting the Responsible Land Policy Project in eastern and northern Uganda. She's a technical advisor, and the project she's working on is helping to access land as a prerequisite for poverty and hunger reduction in rural areas. The focus upon communities and securing customary land rights through land registration. That project is now transitioning to self-financing, and Sarah will be talking about that. She has extensive experience in land governance and conflict management, and also alternatives to dispute resolution. Welcome, Sarah. Christelle van der Berg, Regional Manager for Cadastre International, giving us a different view, supporting land administration developments in multiple African countries, including Rwanda, Benin, and others. She collaborates with ministries, embassies, universities, and global financial partners like the World Bank and the European Union. And in addition, she has recently been appointed as the new director of the School for Land Administration Studies, which is a collaboration between ITC, the University of Twente, and Cadastre, with the objective to enhance knowledge and expertise in the land administration sector. Congratulations, Christelle. Remy Nadayaringa, a governance expert working with VNG International since 2017. Remy will talk about his experience in Burundi, where he helps to improve cooperation on decentralization, land law, local planning, including citizen participation, inclusive governance, and accountability. They have a particular approach there, which they'll be talking about. And then Abdi Hakim, finally but not least, Abdi Hakim Omar, senior advisor with the Vice President's office in Puntland, Somalia, where he and his team play a pivotal role in coordinating and strengthening the capabilities of local governments, the 33 council local governments. And his focus is on revenue enhancement and how to use that to improve land management practices. He will be talking about recent research supported by Land at Scale, looking at land value capture. So again, a slightly different emphasis in his presentation. But again, he will be emphasizing and demonstrating his commitment to innovative approaches to resource mobilization for land management and working towards achieving financially sustainable land administration systems. Thank you. I'd like to now give the floor firstly to Hema Betsema to tell us a bit about the Land at Scale program itself and why sustainable financing of land administration systems is so important. Thank you. Hema.
Yes, thank you, Richard. And also many thanks to our excellent panelists today. I'll just take a few minutes to provide some context and background to the discussion of today, because this is already the fourth webinar in a responsible scaling series that we have initiated as the Land at Scale program together with Land Portal Foundation. And as many of you probably know, Land at Scale is a land governance support program financed by the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs and managed by RVO. And Land at Scale currently has ongoing activities in 12 countries globally, and the work is supported by a program-wide knowledge management component, of which the current webinar is also part. And the aim is to share lessons learned with a wider audience, while also, of course, learning from peers working on similar topics. In the end, with the objective to, improve country-level impact of the program, but also contribute to, learning in the land sector in general. And as Richard mentioned, sustainable financing of land administration systems is indeed very important in the program. When we started Land at Scale in 2019, and the program was launched with the term scaling in the name, we received quite some questions, of course, as to what does scaling then mean in the context of the program. And I think for us, from the very start, and for our partners, it has always been explicitly about more than simply increasing the numbers, increasing number of certificates, increasing secure tenure for more people in more areas, in more countries. It's also very much about focusing on the more structural aspects of land governance, improving systems and procedures in such a way that they become, in the end, more inclusive, self-sustaining, and future-proof. And with that, also the coverage of land services can increase substantially. And obviously then sustainable financing of land administration systems is a key topic in this. Because, I think many of you will know that we have seen too often that land administration systems in particular have been improved over the span of a project. And then when projects leave, the financial sustainability of the approach turned out not to be sufficiently taken into account. So with Land at Scale, we start to bring that aspect in from the very beginning of setting up the program, working with our partners in countries. And we have tried to really integrate this discussion into the planning of the activities. So today we look forward to sharing some of the experiences and lessons with that topic thus far from Somalia, Burundi, and our partner Cadastre International. And also exchanging with others experienced on the topic. So we have a GIZ experience in Uganda. And also, of course, we're eager to also hear from you, your questions and your responses to some of the challenges that we'll be talking about. So yeah, handing back to you, Richard.
Thank you, Hema. Thank you very much for that introduction and just setting the scene for us. Remy, let me turn to you first, please. Can you tell us a bit about your work in Burundi with the Land at Scale program? And then, given the program you're working on, tell us something about how you have seen local authorities and decentralized land services start to transition towards financial sustainability. Remy, please.
Merci à Richard, merci à tout le monde d'avoir participé et bonjour, bon après-midi, là où vous êtes. Au Burundi, nous travaillons effectivement sur la gouvernance et l'administration foncière à travers le programme Land at Scale. Et ce que nous faisons, nous sommes déjà au niveau de la commune Nyanzala, qui est l'une des communes du Burundi, aussi du pays. Et nous sommes beaucoup plus sur la sécurisation foncière, la gestion des conflits, mais aussi on travaille sur la viabilité financière des services fonciers communaux sur base d'un business model approche. Et cette année, là où nous sommes, c'est un programme de 5 ans, presque 5 ans, 56 mois. Nous estimons déjà avec les revenus de la certification foncière à $500 000 qui finance 50% du budget de la commune estimé cette année. Ça veut dire que c'est un montant assez important, non seulement qui peut viabiliser les services fonciers communaux, mais aussi qui peut permettre à la commune de financer les autres services sociaux de base. Ce qui fait que les autorités locales ne peuvent que s'en réjouir. Du moment d'abord que cette gestion décentralisée, cet aspect de sécurisation foncière réduit fortement les conflits fonciers qui répondent aux problèmes réels des communes, mais aussi que ça apporte de la valeur ajoutée en finançant les services. Donc, pour les autorités locales, c'est vraiment, ils sont enthousiastes par ce programme. Le deuxième aspect, c'est que c'est la dimension sociale de cette gestion décentralisée des services. C'est que non seulement ça permet la sécurisation, la réduction des conflits, mais aussi que au niveau du capital, le foncier devient comme un capital. Ils peuvent collaborer facilement avec les banques et les institutions de microfinance sous forme d'hypothèques. Donc, à la fois pour les communes, pour les communautés, ça apporte une grande valeur ajoutée. Ça ne peut se faire que, bien sûr, si c'est soutenu par un cadre légal. Et ça a été une longue journée, un grand processus d'abord de scanner le cadre légal, voir l'environnement légal, ce qui permet la viabilité financière, mais aussi les institutions, les structures qui existent, mais aussi un bon débat avec les conseils communaux qui représentaient les communautés. Je pense jusque-là, il y a une grande satisfaction et on est content que ça va permettre la viabilité financière et d'une manière durable.
Remy, thank you. That's great. That's a really fantastic opening contribution, and it's clear that your business model approach is really producing some fantastic results. I'm going to move to Sarah. I'll come back to you, Remy, but I'd like to move to Sarah and bring her into the conversation. Sarah, can you tell us something about, a little bit like Remy did, what you're doing in Uganda? You're dealing, of course, with customary land and registration of customary land. You've had support from donors, and now you're moving towards self-sustaining. So please, can you tell us a little bit about that, and then also how that sort of change is happening? Sarah.
Thank you, Richard. I hope I'm loud and clear.
You are.
Oh, yes, thank you. The Responsible Land Policy Project that I work with currently in Uganda has been a global project that has been in existence since 2016. Until date, we will be going until sometime next year, May. So the overall objective of the project has been access to land as a prerequisite for poverty and hunger reduction in rural areas, to see to it that it has improved for certain populations, especially for women and marginalized groups. And we are working in central, in the north and eastern Uganda. So what we are working on currently is supporting communities to acquire what we call in our law here, certificates of customary ownership and then certificates of occupancy for the Milo tenuancy. In the beginning, the project would provide funding for the process of land registration to support the entire process of securing customary land rights. However, we all know that projects come and projects go, funding comes and funding ends. So for sustainability, we started to transition in 2022 to a self-financing mode of land registration, which requires communities to make a minimal contribution, a minimal fee, to contribute a minimal fee towards registering of their land. So how we were able to, say, transition to project aided support to a self-financing of registration of land activities was by one, relying on the overwhelming demand from surrounding communities on the needs of land registration. Yeah, this coming from the local leaders, coming from the traditional leaders, is one of the ways that eased us from transitioning, because then these are the structures that are going to do community sensitization and community awareness for self-financing to take off. And then we have also remained at the back to provide technical backstopping, with the duty bearers taking lead in the implementation process. At the end of the day, the overarching need for sustainability plan is to carry on with the land registration process. We don't want to be in a situation whereby once the project funds have ended, and then it means that land registration has ended. No, we are carrying on with that which we can. Continuous awareness raising on the importance of land service delivery to communities was also one of our approaches for transitioning to self-sustaining or self-financing of land registration here in Uganda. Yeah. Back to you, Richard. Thank you.
Thank you so much for a very clear explanation. So you have this this approach now where you are actually moving to a situation where you are providing support to existing institutional structures and existing mechanisms, and people are so interested that they are contributing towards the financing of it. That's great. Fantastic. Thank you so much. We'll be coming back to you for more questions, but for now I'd like to move to Abdi Hakim. A different approach. Abdi Hakim is going to tell us something about his work in Somalia, and in particular in Bosaso, which I believe is one of the largest urban areas. And his approach is based upon, he's going to talk about a recent project dealing with land value capture mechanisms and looking at that as a source for financing for land administration. So Abdi Hakim, over to you.
Yeah. Thank you, Richard. And first, I want to highlight my work, the work my office does. I think everyone can hear me.
Yep.
And my office is under the Vice President's office. We coordinate and we work with the local governments. And we have, over 3 decades, we have for the first time in Puntland local elections. And we needed much to improve the capacity of local governments to have a capacity on improving how to improve the revenue collection, land management, and also to have some sorts of training with the help of the state government. So as we know, if the land management of the local governments improve, that means they receive more revenue from the local community in terms of businesses and other issues. And then they will have some sort of investment to return to the infrastructure and other key issues. So with the help of Netherlands government and through the partnership of land at scale support, we have conducted land value capture in Bosaso, which is the commercial hub of Puntland and also the biggest city. And if I highlight some key issues that we have in Bosaso, there was a limited ownership of the municipality in the land. Most of the land is owned by private people. And also there is a highly land grabbing activities within the local community as a sort of, to have a trade and investment and business-wise. And also we have an outdated and unequitable taxation system. So it was very important to have that kind of research in Bosaso. We already recommended in key issues with the local government, also state government is working on it and so far. And thank you, hope you understand. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that introduction, Dr. Hakim. So it's starting from a different perspective and looking at it from a land value starting point and in an urban environment. And I think also the IDPs, I think, are a big factor there as well with their particular needs.
Yeah, if I may add, in Bosaso we have over 200,000 IDPs whom are residing almost more than 20 years in that place. So the local government and the state government, with the help of international partners like Land at Scale, we have working some strategy that we can integrate them to the local community. They can have their own land and they can benefit it. So now there's a lot of investment in terms of the rural solutions which is going on in Bosaso and other towns in Puntland. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That really, really interesting approach. Thank you. So we've just heard very brief introductions about 3 ongoing programs where people are actively working towards achieving sustainable financing, but from different starting points and different contexts. Perhaps now to give us a slightly different perspective, or perhaps a wider perspective, I'd like to go to Christel. Christel, your work with Dutch cadasters across many countries, across the world, in fact. So it'd be very interesting to hear your views, especially about how we can include financial sustainability, within program design, recognizing that, of course, through Cadastre International, you work with countries at different stages of land administration development, some very sophisticated systems, some systems perhaps not so well developed. And from your perspective, what can you draw from that? What are the key factors that enable land institutions to transition from externally funded projects or from government funding to self-sustaining entities? Thank you. Christel.
Thank you, Richard. Well, I would say there are many factors, but the most important are, on the first place, that land and the land governance and land registration is high on the political agenda, because there needs to be a certain ambition, or actually a high ambition within the government, to get this job done, so to say. Because the ambition within the government must be there because, and that is my second point, the institutional collaboration is really needed, because you need to work together on governmental level, on institutional level, to get this financial system in place. And well, collaboration is needed, but at least there must be awareness of the fact that you need to trust each other and that there needs to be collaboration. And the third point is, of course, that there needs to be a business model, a business plan that is agreed and acted upon by all the institutions that are involved within sustainable land administration systems. And this means that there should be agreements between the stakeholders involved in the land administration chain. That can be municipalities, that can be local governments or national governments, provincial governments. All the chain partners should be involved. Because in some countries, for example, the municipalities have a role in maintaining the data. So, I mean, when a transaction takes place, landowners have to go to a municipality. And a national government, for example, provides a central database where all the data is securely stored. And then there should be a funding model where the revenues from the system covers the costs. So the staff, the equipment, infrastructure, etc. And in this example, it should be at both local and national level. And this means that this requires good agreements between the local and the national levels. That is why I said there's collaboration is needed. Because it is not easy, specifically not in the beginning. And I understand that, because it is all about money. And when it comes to that, there are all kinds of interests are at play. And the trick is to work well together in this as players in the chain. And ideally, you would say, yeah, I would talk about chain partners, because only if you work well together as partners, land administration can generate a lot of money. And of course, in addition to a large number of other benefits that contribute to the development of to a whole society. So it's not only about the money that the benefits from sustainable land administration is not only in terms of financial benefits, but of course many others. But today we're talking about the financial part. So yeah, that is why I refer to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Christelle. Yeah, and that last point actually is perhaps an important one. That's what we are particularly focusing on in this webinar today. We're very well aware of other benefits and all kinds of other questions around land governance, but it's the financial sustainability issues that we're focusing on today in this discussion. Thank you for reminding us about that. What is emerging quite clearly is that we have the problems of financing the first registration, which was talked about, for instance, with respect to the Ugandan example, first registration of customary land. And we have the examples also of how to have sustainable land administration operations. And on that theme, I'd like to go back to Remy. Remy, you have this business plan approach, which is quite interesting because often business plans are left for much later in the development chain. With that approach, what can you tell us about what strategies have been most effective, in your opinion, in ensuring that land registration and land services are able to generate sustainable revenues while remaining accessible to communities and providing services as needed? Remy, thank you.
Oui, merci encore une fois pour la question. Je pense que Christella venait bien de le dire tantôt. C'est beaucoup plus une dimension tactique que stratégique. C'est de trouver, c'est de regarder la chaîne d'administration foncière et bien travailler, collaborer avec ces structures. D'abord, sur le plan institutionnel, on a eu à travailler au niveau local avec les conseils communaux, qui sont les délégués des communautés, pour que ça soit accepté. Et sur le plan national, on a travaillé avec le ministère en charge des terres, mais aussi la Commission foncière nationale qui joue un rôle régulateur. Donc, ça, c'est le premier aspect de notre plan tactique. Le deuxième aspect, c'était de socialiser notre approche et penser à discuter avec les conseils communaux sur la détermination des coûts abordables en considérant le coût de la vie des communautés, disons le coût d'un régime de bananes, le coût d'un poulet, et pour persuader les communautés, le coût d'un lapin, pour le coût de 10 kilos de haricots, pour persuader les communautés que c'est un coût abordable que tout le monde peut payer. Le troisième aspect tactique, c'était c'est le système. En fait, pour que quelque chose soit durable, c'est de pouvoir l'intégrer dans le budget de la commune et que ça soit systématisé et que ça donne de la valeur ajoutée à la commune. Définitivement, les trois dimensions ont fait que le pays adhère au service foncier communal et financièrement viable. Ce sont les trois aspects importants que je peux citer pour le moment.
Remy, thank you for that. You mentioned affordability, in fact, which I think, again, is a really interesting and important point when we start talking about people paying for different kinds of services. I'm going to jump to Sarah, back to Sarah now. And in particular, I'd like to ask again about a bit more detail about what strategies you've used to help to achieve the self-financing approach to land registration. And bearing in mind Remy's remark, can you say something about the affordability of the process? You mentioned that people are making a contribution to the cost of the services and also scaling up. How do you then scale up? So, Sarah, please.
Okay, thank you, Richard. The strategies that we have used, the first is the use of existing government and community structures or institutions to facilitate the process of land registration. Like I said initially, we were using, let's say, some companies, NGOs, maybe external contractors. So this time we are using the already existing structures, starting from the Ministry of Lands to the district, to the local government, down to the community. And the purpose of this is for them to own the process, that the process is theirs, and so they can carry on with it. Secondly, we have also developed a capacity building cascade approach where we started with the capacity building of the different stakeholders who are involved in land registration, right from the top level, the ministry level, Ministry of Lands, Housing and Urban Development. In Uganda is the ministry that comes into play when it comes to land governance and land governance services. So once the capacities have been built at that level, then they can come down to the district level, to the sub-county level, and then to the community level. And all these are structures that we believe in existence for a longer time because they work directly with government. Thirdly, we also embarked on awareness creation, community sensitization meetings. And for this strategy to work, we basically used, again, the government structures. Once capacity building has been done, their capacity has been enhanced of these different stakeholders. It is the same stakeholders who work at community level and at sub-county level who go down to sensitize about land registration processes. And then the last aspect could be inclusive consultative processes in setting of minimal fees. Now, if we were just to throw a fee, let's say we've just thought about a fee and given it to a particular district and say, okay, this is what you should pay for land registration, I think maybe it would be difficult for them to take it in. But to make the process easier, we had consultative, it's a consultative process where the sub-county leaders consult with the community leaders to ascertain how much do you think that these community members can be able to contribute. And in this way, this is one of the things that has enabled self-financing to thrive because they themselves have set the fees that they find suitable for even the most marginalized groups. And then for scaling up of the process, we are looking at these districts, different districts and sub-counties being able to include land service delivery into their annual budgets. Now, once this has been included into their annual budgets, then they can be able to scale up to other sub-counties within a particular district or to other communities in a particular area, because then the funds are within reach. The funds are within them. So this is one of the strategies that can be used for scaling up of the process. Yeah. Over to you, Richard. Yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. That's really interesting. And in fact, I'm struck very much by the fact that you're using existing structures and rather than using external actors, let's say, to achieve the registration process. And on that theme, I'd like to jump back to Abdi Hakim, because where you're working, I think you have a lot of. I'd like to ask you about another aspect, really, where perhaps those structures aren't quite so well developed in place. So could you say something about the role of informal land transactions and land brokers in shaping land governance in Bosaso, given you have a rather different environment? And how do you think you could possibly look at integrating these actors and bring them into formal land value capture systems to perhaps improve urban planning, revenue generation, and land administration generally? Thank you. Abdi Hakim.
Okay, thank you. As we mentioned in the study, in Bosaso, we have non-traditional, non-formal, and land transaction or land business. And the land brokers and also some guys we call land traders, they buy a small plot of land in a very cheap money, then they resell in higher value. They have most say in the land value and which area that it will become expensive or which area that they won't make it like cheap. So, and in this study and also within government coordination meetings, what we mentioned it was, we have to regulate both of them, the land traders and also the land and brokers. So our recommendations were first to have some sort of registration system. Now we only, the land ministry, state minister of land and public works, they gave them a small ID as a land broker, but they don't regulate much. So what we recommended now is to have a registration system within the local authority, the municipality, and also the state government. Both of them will regulate the land brokers and also the land traders. So you have a registration system in place, and also incentivize when they formalize everything. If the land broker or the land trader he takes the license to conduct that certain activity, then we can leverage the knowledge and the network. Since the government, the state government has, or the local government has a information system in place, then any land broker who has the license and the registration, then he can access whatever information the local government or the state government has. And the second one is also to build their capacity and also involve them when there is a land planning process. If there's an investment in certain area of the neighborhood in a town, then we involve them, both of them, the land brokers and the land traders, so they can join the committees and they can feel that they are partners, not as government and against those. Thank you.
That's really interesting. So you're actually using the brokers to help incentivize formalization.
Yeah.
Interesting. Thank you. Okay. Yeah, again, really interesting, different approaches. It's always amazing to me how many different ways there are of doing things. Christelle, back to you. Just develop.
If may I add, and I missed one more point. If I'm sorry, Christelle. For the first time in Bosaso now, the state government is coordinating with the local government to have a main road which is 8 kilometers long. And we have different stakeholders, like the state government wants to support the road, and also the local government wants to support the road, and also we have different international partners and donors who want to support. So we said, why we didn't mobilize the resource all together? Then we can finish the 8 kilometers. So by using the study, we said let's involve everyone. Now, next week, earlier of March, there will be a feasibility study that everyone will be involved in. Then that road will go through the biggest IDP site in Bosaso, which holds over, I think, over 8 or 10,000 families, IDPs. So if it goes there, then actually the land value will increase, and there will be a revenue for the local government and also the state government. So far, the local government, they delivered over 400 families to title deeds in those areas. So it will be a good, for the first time, by using the study, and also the support of different stakeholders, including as I mentioned before, Bosaso is the commercial hub. Yeah. So the commercial, the business, most of the business community in Puntland, they reside in Bosaso. There is the headquarters of the Chamber of Commerce. So we asked them if they contribute the road, and they already chime in. All partners, different partners, including the Chamber of Commerce and the business community, state government, local government, all will come together and they will invest. And so far, we have commitments from different partners. That's I want to add, it's the first time that we use the state. Thank you.
That's really interesting. So you've got a kind of pooling of interests and a cooperative effort there, and you're basically able to improve the registration, the land value rises as well as once the road's in place. So you've got several things running together there, which again are quite an interesting way of creating a kind of incentive that moves towards a more sustainable process system. Christel, back to you, please. I want to continue this dialogue about financial sustainability and affordability in land registration. So could you comment a little perhaps on what you've seen about innovative financial models or strategies that you have seen that can be successful in generating revenue land administration? We've heard some things already, but I'd love to hear your view on it as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm also very eager to learn from the Burundi, Somalia, and Uganda examples. So happy to join in this panel, also to learn from that. And yeah, Richard, you already made this distinction between the initial cost for, like, for example, first-time registration and the operational costs to maintain the system. And well, back to your question, I would like to refer to the latter one, so the operational cost to maintain the system. And yeah, various models exist. They vary from funding by government, most of the time state government, the national treasury, or to funding from fees. And also a mix of these both systems is possible. And well, if you talk about my experience, the most national mapping and cadastral agencies in the countries where Cadastre International works, they are financed by the state government. So that means that there is a fixed budget per year. And well, to be honest, in a lot of cases, this budget is also declining every time. So yeah, because when governments provide funding, there's an immediately political influence involved, and therefore it's also vulnerable for renouncement. What I also see in these examples is that there is less flexibility for increases in work volume, for example. So if the work volume increases, there's not enough budget to maintain, to operate, and then yeah, there the problem starts. And also there's no incentive for improving services because innovation requires additional budget, and then you have to go back to the national government to ask for funding and so on. And then there is this political influence again. So that is well the things that come with state government funded systems or models. Another model at the other side of the spectrum is funding from fees. Then the income is dependent on the work volume. And the funding comes from the users. Whether they are private citizens or professionals, it comes in the end from the users who pay the fees to, well, for the funding for your organization. And that is why it's also, but that is why also users become important as stakeholders. And another aspect from funding from fees is that the quality improvement and the innovation that they can be recovered from the fee income. So you can also take this one into account. And what I said earlier, both models or a big mix of both models can work as long as the costs that are needed to manage and sustain a sustainable land administration are fully covered. And this is something else than adjusting the operational costs to the available budget. That is really something else. And another condition to make one of the models work is that there is room for innovation and growth. So for models that are primarily funded by the government budget, which is possible, but it means that agreements must be made also for several years that allow for innovation and growth. Because otherwise you cannot adjust to new situations and developments, and then yes, problems start to maintain the operational, to cover the operational costs.
Thank you, Christelle. Yeah, so when we're looking at operational costs, as you say, often it's governments that are the prime source of funds, and of course, often that's not enough in many countries, and that impacts the quality of services. I liked what you said about innovation and growth and the opportunity to perhaps increase services and I guess also revenue possibly by that as well. And the mixed model where you have some level of income and some support from government, so you can look at the cost recovery levels. That again, I think is quite interesting. So thank you for that. I'd like to change the direction a little bit of the discussion, because sometimes as soon as we start talking about things like people paying for things, then there's always a risk that we are somehow ignoring or leaving behind parts of the community. So I'd like to maybe address that question head on if I can, and ask it to some of our panelists today. Remy, ensuring equitable access to land services is crucial, especially if we're trying to avoid reinforcing inequality. So from your experience in Burundi and thinking about the financing mechanisms, the business model approach you have, how can we structure that to be sure we're providing the right kind of support for marginalized groups such as women, youth, and the Batwa in securing their land rights and allowing them to access the services? Thank you. Remy.
Non, pour assurer que tout le monde prenne part à la sécurisation foncière, tout dépend de l'approche qu'on utilise. Le fait qu'on fait l'enregistrement systématique des terres garantit que toutes les parcelles, que ce soit pour les riches, que ce soit pour les pauvres, que ce soit pour les terres publiques, soient systématiquement enregistrées. Donc, ce qui permet que les plus riches paient pour les moins nantis. Donc, plus les plus riches ont de grandes superficies, ils paient aussi pour les moins nantis qui ont de petites superficies, et le coût moyen devient plus ou moins capable de couvrir toutes les charges foncières et dégager des surplus. Ça, c'est le premier aspect. Donc, l'enregistrement systématique. Cet enregistrement systématique aussi se fait avec la séparation des terres des privés et des terres publiques, ce qui nous permet aussi de dégager, de quantifier les terres publiques et de plaider pour le santé. Par exemple, au niveau du Burundi, compte tenu de la disponibilité des terres publiques, nous avons déjà initié le processus de donner des terres publiques, une partie des terres publiques aux communautés des Batwa, qui sont les sans-terre. Donc, enregistrer systématiquement permet de dégager les terres des privés et les terres publiques, et ça vous donne l'accès de plaidoyer pour les sans-terre. Et voilà globalement comment on fait sur le Burundi. La parole est à vous, Richard.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so you are thinking about it and you have got measures in place quite clearly, and you have specific measures to identify those groups that you have strongly identified as being potentially disadvantaged. And I'm sure that's the case. Maybe I can ask the same question to Sarah. In the districts you're working in, because I understand that the model you have now is being applied in districts, several districts or lots of districts now across Uganda. It's starting to be scaled up. You're working at sub-county, community and district level. How are you in your work ensuring equitable access to land services? Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Richard. We are working in about 6 districts, and hopefully we are even scaling further. Actually, I could say more than 6 because of the districts in the central region as well. So to ensure equitable access, one of the ways that we have devised is proposing and setting of minimal fees by these leaders. The fee for registration of land, I could say the most least fee that we have experienced is about 50,000 Uganda shillings. And when converted to euro, that should be maybe between 10 to 12 euro, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So this is to allow even the most marginalized groups to be able to afford land services, land service registration, especially documentation of their land rights. That's one of the ways. And then secondly, we are also looking at strengthening of alternative dispute resolution mechanisms to resolve conflicts through different methods. Using the local traditional structures, using the district leaders, the sub-county leaders, religious leaders, and even involvement of women in these groups to be able to resolve all these land disputes that will arise, to enable even the most marginalized to access their land rights. And then we have also devised deliberate community programs that help women and other marginalized groups to be able to participate, let's say, in community awareness creations. For example, when we advocate for community awareness, we advise that awareness creation should be rather done in the afternoon rather than in the morning, because in the morning, the women tend to be more engaged in other domestic activities, but in the afternoon, they can be able to attend these awareness creation or education meetings on land services. And so they can be able to gain knowledge and then also participate when it comes to land service delivery. Like if one wants to register her land or acquire a title or even have a dispute over land resolved, they get this information through awareness creation. So those are some of the deliberate moves that we have put in place to ensure that there is equitable access. Even capacity building at district level, at sub-county level, and at community level. It's also another deliberate effort that we put in place so that even to the most vulnerable in the community are able to have information available on land rights. Yeah. Thank you, Richard. Yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. So yeah, it's always important and essential, in fact, that we have these mechanisms in place. So it's great to see that they are there and being followed up as you expand the program. Abi Hakim, I'm going to come to you, and I'm going to sort of combine the next 2 questions a little bit just to catch up on time. And it's kind of a similar sort of question, really, but you're coming at it from a land value capture side. So how can you have strategies associated with land values that can be structured to provide solutions for IDPs, while also, as you mentioned, trying to strengthen municipal revenues and land governance, because some people might think there's a kind of tension in that requirement, let's say. And at the same time, maybe if I can also ask you, thinking of the next step about land value, land value is often then associated with property taxation. So is there any implication for property taxation from the land value work that you've been doing? And if there is, how can we think about fair and efficient taxation models, especially given the kind of large IDP community that you have? Thank you.
And thank you, Richard. First, I want to highlight the background. In Bosaso, since mid-90s, it was the safe haven for the Somali IDPs from the unsafe areas in Somalia. So there is more, when I say IDPs, some of them are there for 10 years, 20 years, things like that. So, and the state government established a policy that aimed in 3 categories: anyone who wants to return, anyone who wants to resettle origin of place, and also the ones who want to reintegrate, like in Bosaso. So what we did, and what the state government did, is the local authority bought a land in Bosaso so they can have their own and shelters. It's like 4 kilometers from the town center, with no infrastructure, no electricity, no water, schools, all those things. When they was resettled there, what the state government with the local authority, what they did was they started to have some sort of infrastructure there, like the water and health facilities and also education. Now, what we are working on to have an access road, which is a tarmac road that goes through the IDPs. We have the idea, we have an idea that when that road goes through those areas, actually the land value will increase. Before that happens, the local authority already started to give the title deeds to the IDPs. And also what we have discussed now, there is a law that describes the authority and the regulations that the local authority has on the IDPs in terms of taxation, in terms of revenue collection, in terms of investment. It's going on, and there's a review. What we recommended by using the study, that there is the taxation system in place is outdated. Because in Bosaso we have different areas, like the business area and the neighborhood of the settlements, IDPs neighborhoods or any other neighborhood. The local authority collects a small taxation with the same bracket. But now we recommended to have different brackets, meaning that there should be a tied property taxation. If it's a residential neighborhood like the one of the IDPs, then it will be lower than the commercial ones. But now everything are the same. Okay. So the taxation system is going on, and there's a discussion, and before at the end of the year, they will have a law that clearly defines everything.
Okay.
And also we will, the local government is already working on to formalize the IDP's land tenure. That everyone will have a title deed, the land, a plot of land, like 10 meters per 10 meters. So they can, and also with the support of different partners, they already built like 2 rooms and a toilet, things like that. Okay. So with that in mind, and we want to enable a gradual tax inclusion, and finally to promote a public-private partnership, which is the first of its kind in Somalia. Now the public and the private partnership, there will be a program that will have a small power plant, which will give the electricity to that certain area. Okay. And then there will be a partnership with the private, then so they can have a cheap electricity.
Yeah.
And also we are working with the land as a collaboration, which I explained it before. Thank you.
Okay, so you've got quite a holistic approach here, where it's the whole kind of urban development, land value increase. You're also allocating land to IDPs, and you're looking very much at securing that, and then having a staggered system if you introduce the taxation system or modify the taxation system so it's cognizant of IDP needs. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to now jump back to Christelle. I'm going to ask if we can maybe take slightly shorter answers, because I'd like to leave time for questions from the audience. Christelle, Cadastre collaborates with lots of entities and governments worldwide. What can they do? How can international partnerships such as the World Bank or the EU, etc., what should they be doing in terms of thinking about trying to achieve these kind of solutions we're talking about today? Thank you.
Yeah, well, A lot, really a lot. Specifically for the first time registration, for the initial costs, it's with the aim to organize a nationwide land administration. Then these kind of organizations can help a lot. They can also trigger, of course, if they will assist specific countries with loans or other financial support. They can trigger them to think about having financial business models in place, having procedures in place to maintain the data, to have a safe and storage land administration system in place. So that really triggers them. But if I really go back to your question, how can they help to build more resilient and financial sustainable land governance systems, then I would say that they can help really a lot with the first investment to organize a nationwide land administration, because we all know that there are various methods to collect these data, and these methods can be good. They have to be good enough. They have to be fast. They have to be affordable because people have to pay and it has to be paid. And we often talk then about fit for purpose land administration. I think you know this terminology, and a lot of people in this panel know this term. But yeah, a national government that wants to collect data from across the entire country, it can become really costly, and it depends, of course, on many factors. How high the costs are. I mean, I'm talking about the size of the country, the numbers of estimated land parcels, the level of accuracy, and so on. And all these factors determine the total cost of collecting data for the first time. In Benin, for example, we estimated that it will cost about $150 million to only collect the estimated 8 million parcels. And it then helps enormously if international partners, such as the World Bank or the European Union, are willing to make this first-time investment. But yeah, I would end this part, because I would really strongly advise these financial partners to only make this investment if at the same time, or even better beforehand, a business plan or something like this being developed that indicates how the investment cost can be recovered over time by the country itself.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that last point is a really important one. And I think we don't often consider that at the conceptualization stage when we're planning the programs. We kind of think about that one a bit later. And I'm thinking of my own personal experience, perhaps from some time ago in Eastern Europe in the 90s, when that really wasn't a consideration very much. It was only a thought that came along later. So I like the three things that you emphasized: procedures to maintain collected data, safe and sustainable storage of data, and having a business model, having those things in place and clear before you kind of really get going and ramp up.
Plus, it takes also time to have this business model.
Takes time.
It's about trust and collaboration. It takes time. Yeah.
Sure, it's not purely a technical approach.
No, absolutely not.
Absolutely. Thank you. Okay. I do have a couple of questions left around the importance of data, sort of carrying that particular theme forward, open and transparent land data. Again, I'd like to ask for brief answers on this one, so we can open the floor for questions. Firstly, Remy, open and transparent land data is increasingly recognized as a tool for strengthening governance and financial sustainability, a necessity, just as Christelle has talked about. What do you think, how important is that, do you think, in not just improving revenue generation, but fostering things like trust in land administration systems, and also encouraging people to use systems and contribute to the data? Any strategies or suggestions? Thank you, Remy.
Oui, merci de la question. D'abord, il faut que, pour garantir la transparence, il faut qu'il y ait un système d'information foncier national qui soit accessible à tous les partenaires. Ça, c'est hautement important. C'est le seul moyen de garantir la transparence. L'autre élément assez important pour garantir la durabilité, il faut que ce système d'information national génère des services et des services de qualité, et pour que les partenaires qui cherchent ces services puissent les avoirs. Et ces services doivent être payés et à un coût qui est assez élevé qui peut garantir la continuité du système, le fonctionnement du système, mais aussi assez bas pour qu'il soit assez accessible à ses partenaires. Voilà globalement comment on peut garantir et assurer la continuité du système d'information foncière. À vous, Richard, la parole.
Thank you. Can I go to you, Sarah, with the same question, please? And maybe just
Okay.
to say it again, we're thinking about the importance of open, transparent, accessible information systems, how that contributes to financial sustainability, how that contributes to fostering trust, etc. Do you have any comments you'd like to add to what Remy said on that one?
Yeah, I think with open and transparent systems, it will enhance transparency and social accountability. When we have open systems, then we are minimizing the risks for opportunities for corruption in land services, ensuring that land registration processes are free, are fair, they are transparent, and they can increase trust. So for us in the self-financing project, what we are looking at, while it is an ongoing approach, we are looking at an intervention to handle the loophole of social accountability and transparency of systems, where we can be able to address maybe the challenge of risk and corruption tendencies in land registration process. And this can be, we will start with capacity building of stakeholders involved in the processes, community awareness meetings, and then also making policy recommendations and reviews that could support to enhance transparent and open systems in the land sector. Yeah, this would really be my thoughts and what we envisage to work on when it comes to the self-financing approach.
And if I may add, you have a national land administration system, which you are beginning to feed data into from customer land. Is that correct?
Yes.
So you're on your way. Thank you. Okay. I'd like to then just go back, maybe just to have the last question now, back to Christelle. And it's really, again, on the data side. Would you like to add anything to what has been said on this and the importance? You've talked about this already a little bit, but do you have any closing thoughts on it or about the importance of data, how we manage that, and the significance of it, especially with respect to things like land markets and development, etc.? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. I very much echo the words of the former speakers about affordability, affordability to use the system, because this is where it's all about. Revenue generation starts with an economic wheel that needs to start turning. And therefore it is important to have a certain volume of data. So registered parcels, with data, registered parcels. And what I mean is that there must be a critical mass on which the wheel starts turning. And for that to happen, the data has to be reliable and above all affordable. And because then people will start using it. And that is the whole idea. People, society in general, have to start using the system, and it has to become normal to run transactions, whether it is sales or whether it is inheritance or whatever. It has to be normal that it should run through a reliable land administration system. And this is possible only if the transaction fees are affordable. And the pre-investment will then be needed to keep the tariffs low from the start. And this is also where investors can come in, like World Bank or European Union. And it can be calculated in advance from when the turning point takes place. So a point at which it no longer costs money, but the point on which money can be generated from the system. And this should be included in this business plan. And of course, it is also really important that people, so the users, society in general, that they see the added value of a land administration system and what's in it for them. So the more reliable data you get into the system, the harder the economic wheel will turn. And as an example, in the Netherlands, for example, billions of euros are involved in the Dutch real estate market. And this is, of course, only possible with a reliable and affordable land administration system. So I hope that maybe gives a bit of answer to your question. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's a good way to sum up, really, because if the system is working and if we are starting to have transactions and if the market is starting to work, then what did you call it? The economic wheel to turn. And I guess if that happens, then we are starting to have we are starting to meet the needs of users on one hand, the demand side, and we are also supplying the services that they're asking for and getting that balance right. So thank you very much for that. We're now, I think, about 10 past the hour. We have 20 minutes or so. We have a large number of questions which we're not going to get through in the available time. So I will ask Neil at the end how we deal with outstanding questions. Neil Sorensen is the organizer from Land Portal, known to many of you, of course. I'll ask him to say something at the end. But for the moment, I'd like to try to move through these quite quickly. So rather than giving any kind of summing up myself now, I'll jump straight to the questions, which Neil has kindly collated for us and provided. And I'd like to ask the panelists to give a very, very brief answer so that we can move through the questions as quickly as possible. The first question is from Nicole Grosskamp for Reme. Reme, it'd be helpful to hear how the program has shifted land tenure rights. For example, how many people now have secure land tenure rights? How has the program accelerated the number of people with land tenure? Please give a very brief answer. Thank you. Okay, Remy? Sorry, I may have caught Remy by surprise, excuse me.
C'est une bonne question. Combien c'est peut-être pas la question la plus importante, mais la question la plus importante, c'est comment le système marche pour sécuriser le droit foncier des personnes. Mais là, s'il faut dire pour le moment, on a 75 000 sur la commune dans laquelle on travaille. Mais ça, c'est juste une commune pilote qui, qui va faciliter l'élaboration d'un guide national pour le fonctionnement des services fonciers communaux. Ça veut dire que c'est beaucoup plus le potentiel que ça donne la commune pilote, le programme pour sécuriser les droits fonciers des personnes. Mais pour ça, c'est vraiment symbolique, c'est petit, mais quand vous regardez l'approche, comment le système va fonctionner, ça va donner ça un potentiel immense. Et nos ambitions, c'est d'utiliser le même système pour tout le territoire national, ce qui veut dire que pour le moment, combien ça n'a pas une grande importance. À vous la parole, Richard, pour d'autres questions.
Okay, we'll give you a pass on that one. Okay, Nicole, from Nicole Grosskamp, this is to all panelists. So I'm going to read the question and then I'm going to ask for a volunteer to answer it. So if you'd listen, please. I wonder how the incoming regulations on commodity-driven deforestation may be influencing land tenure initiatives. I'm thinking in particular about smallholders producing cocoa and coffee. I realize the question is not directly about sustainable financing, so I'm happy to skip the question, but I'm also happy to take the question if one of the panelists would like to answer. If not, we'll pass. Okay, I can certainly comment that it's a big question, Nicole, and a really good question. And yeah, it's something which has been looked at by a number of people now, and how those regulations are going to impact small suppliers and the commodity chains is going to be a big thing. It's going to require a lot of work to create those chains. And yeah, I think that question's really for another session and probably would be worthy of a whole webinar in itself. From Gonbo Tenzin, to start a corporate style functioning of land governance in a country, from what should we start the business model and sustainability progress? I'm going to ask Christelle if she would be willing to address that question. So to start a corporate style functioning of land governance in a country, from what basis should we start the business model for sustainability progress? Christelle, would you be willing to?
Yeah, of course, of course. Well, I would say, again, as I mentioned before, it starts with the ambition of the government itself to have this kind of model. So that the system, the revenues from the system also will go back through the system to the system and not directly to the national treasury. So that is one of the first agreements on intergovernmental level that need to be made in order to start such a model. And then, of course, you need to know how what are the costs to what are the full operational costs to manage the whole system in terms of in the best possible way, in a sustainable way. And if you calculate these costs, these all need to be covered. And yeah, you need to find agreements on, okay, who is in the chain, in the land administration chain will receive which part of the revenues of the system. So that's a whole set of agreements that need to be made up front before you can introduce it and start it.
Okay, so we need to go through that process of thinking about it and agreeing it before we actually start the operations, yeah?
Absolutely.
Okay, question for Sarah from Mina Bayan. Okay, Sarah, is the self-financing approach for land registration geared towards collective customary land or individual private lands? And then the question goes on, if it's collective, how are the communities managing in raising the self-finance, considering that most of these communities are poor? Are you okay with that question, Sarah?
Yes. First, I will approach this question in regards to the provisions of the law. Now, the Constitution of Uganda recognizes 4 tenure systems, and customary land is one of those forms of tenure. Customary is recognized as a tenure in Uganda. So this is not something new. It's like we are just enhancing what is already provided in the law. And so one can register their customary land as family or as an individual. Yeah. Also, this is again within the provisions of the law. And looking at the vulnerability of these communities, I had indicated earlier that for the system to fairly thrive or to fairly pick up, there should be consultative meetings right from the communities on how much they can really afford, and the fees have to be as minimal as possible. Like this is the bottom line. Yeah, if the fees are coming from, let's say, GIZ staff or someone is from another organization is suggesting that, oh, let them pay this fee, then it's going to be very hard for the poor or the vulnerable to say that we can afford it. But it is up to them to be like, this is what we can afford. And also what is helping it to thrive is the fact that we are using already existing government structures. When we talk about existing government structures, we are not going to be paying the staff that are working in the government. Already the government is paying them. Yeah, so they are only there to support what should have been done by them. But, you know, it is one of those systems that has been left behind. I must say that self-financing has been in existence for other tenures. We have other tenures like the freehold tenure, the Milo tenure, and then the leasehold tenure system. All these a self-financed tenure systems, it is only customary tenure that has been left behind, and a lot of land is unregistered under this tenure. So it's like we're pulling up also the system to be at the same level and at par with the other systems as provided by the Constitution and then the other laws in Uganda. Yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. And I think that last point was a great one, that it's bringing customary land and the freehold land, the other tenure forms, and treating them in the same way. So giving them the same level. Thank you. Another question, Nicole Grosskamp, perhaps to Hema, if Hema is okay. It's okay. Hema, is it possible to speak about the overall impact of the program? I assume the land at scale program. How many nations do you work in? How many households are secured on tenure, etc.? How many economically sustainable other established programs? That question must have been asked by a surveyor. There's lots of numbers in there, but Hema, over to you, please.
Yeah, thank you, Richard, and thank you for the question as well. As I mentioned in the beginning, the program is active in 12 countries, and I just quickly looked up where we are now, but tenure security for 160,000 people has been realized. But I think what is maybe more interesting also in the context of this webinar is that in basically all of those countries, our partners are continuously trying to identify entry points for also more structural improvements based on the experiences also of doing the registration of the land. So, for example, up until now, over 400 institutions have been strengthened. And just to mention an example, in Colombia, we've been working, and Christelle knows this really well because Cadastre is involved, but we've been working in a couple of pilot areas to try and see how does a fit-for-purpose land administration approach works out on the ground. But then also bringing back those lessons and discussing them with the government at the national level to try and see if it's possible to also integrate this in the existing laws and regulations. So to try and kind of like link that up to both work on tenure security for communities and for people, while also looking at how does this then connect to how structures are set up and systems are functioning. And maybe nice to mention that at this moment, many of our projects are already in the second part of their implementation, and we've recently started kind of an exercise with all of the project partners to kind of take a step back, look at what has been happening thus far, and also just asking that tricky question that, okay, let's say the project ends now, what will remain? And are there still things that we could like tweak or that we could work on in the second part of the project to make sure that this impact is increased? So I'll leave it there. I hope this was an answer to your question.
That's very clear. Thank you. Emma, there is a follow-up question which I'd like to jump to, please, from Wordsworth Nabi. And the question is, do you see any role for private sector? It's addressed to you, excuse me. Do you see any role for private sector funds in land registration programs? If yes, which models work best?
Yeah, I think this would also be a good question for our panelists, but from my side, what I see is that the mandate of land registration is with the government, and also our speakers have really emphasized that existing institutions and structures have to be closely involved. But there are interesting examples. For example, in some of the land at scale countries, we see that businesses who are working with, for example, outgrowers have realized that it's very important to register land of outgrowers to make sure that the land is managed in a sustainable way. So there you see at smaller scale, you see initiatives, and also, but Abdi Hakim can speak more to this, but in Somalia, with the land value capture, there's also a link being made to private sector investments. But so yeah, I guess that can be part of the puzzle. But for the sustainable financing of land administration, government at all those different levels will remain is the central partner. Yeah.
Thank you. Would any of the panelists care to expand on that question also? If not, maybe I'd like to follow up on the sort of slight handover offered by Hema and jump to Abdul Hakim. There is a associated question from Leonard Omulo. How do you use land brokers in registration? I guess this is the private sector in a way. And the comment is that land brokers sometimes don't follow regulations, they are difficult to register, they can be more difficult. So how do you use them, and how do you manage them? How do you make them productive?
As I mentioned before, thank you, Richard. As I mentioned before, there will be some incentives. Whoever registered, whoever goes through the regulations, they will receive, like, we recommended that we have to have some sort of land management information system in place, which run it by the local authority and also the state and the Ministry of Land and Public Works. So anyone who goes through the normal procedure, any land broker or land trader who goes through the normal procedures will receive incentives in the form of, let us say, and we will have a capacity support, I mean, trainings conducted by the government or another partner of the government. Then we will invite them, and anyone who works, and he will receive with the government and also go through the laws and the regulations, and he can join the committees that will, the planning committees in a certain area. Otherwise, if he doesn't, if there is some sort of penalty, or if he is not following the regulations, or he didn't do the regulations, then the local government or the state government will ban him not to join any programs or any activities that's conducted by the state government or the local government. So okay. It's work in progress. So they will have check and balances. Okay. Anyone who follows the laws, then he will receive incentives. Anyone who doesn't follow the laws, there will be a penalty.
That seems pretty clear. That's a pretty clear way of doing it. Thank you, Abdul Hakim. Yeah. We have 2 minutes to the close. So what I'd like to do now is firstly apologize for those questions that we haven't answered. I will check with Neil if there's a way that we can facilitate some way to answer those questions, perhaps after the session has concluded, in writing or something. But I would like to give each of the speakers a last opportunity for closing remark and ask them to give me a kind of, I don't know, if there's anything that they feel that we haven't covered today that's really important they'd like to say, or any reflection or any advice they'd like to give to the wider community who might be thinking about following along the kind of pathways that have been outlined today. So if you could give me a quick 30 seconds, and maybe Abdul Hakim, you're on the screen now, so I'll start with you. 30 seconds, what's your kind of takeaway from today, or what would you like to say as a closing statement? Sorry, did you hear me, Abdul Hakim?
Yeah, I can hear you. And yeah, it's for me, it's
very quick.
The first time. Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
And for me, it's the first time I experienced this kind of webinar forum. Thank you all, and also I thank all the participants and anyone who contributed to host this webinar. And I also thank the other panelists. I actually gained a lot of information and also some things I didn't know before. So, and hopefully I join this kind of webinars in the future.
Thank you. Any advice?
Thank you. I don't have any I don't have any recommendations.
Okay.
It's
thank you.
It's my first time. Thank you.
Okay, Sarah, how about you? Do you have some advice or
yes?
Comment for it?
I see that there are a lot of concerns on the questions, but Richard, from my end, I just want to give one success factor for self-financing to thrive. If there is a plan for one to use self-financing, and it is the ownership of the process. The ownership of the process by the stakeholders and incorporating land services into the annual budgets at the district level or within the government structures is one factor that can enable self-financing to thrive, because then it will be a continuous process. Annual budgets are made every year, and if the land services are included in there, then the government is going to support like half of the process and meet the communities halfway. Yeah, so this is for me one advice, and I want to thank the other panelists and also for hosting this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you. Remy, may I come to you? If you have a very short closing remark, please.
Bon, j'étais honoré pour participer à cette plateforme. J'ai eu la chance de participer pour la deuxième fois et je reçois, mais aussi je partage. Et je suis désolé qu'il y a beaucoup de questions dans ce panel auquel on n'a pas réussi à répondre. Peut-être si la facilitation organise et structure ces questions, on pourrait peut-être donner des compléments, des réponses ou peut-être les reporter dans une session ultérieure. Et tous mes remerciements alors à la facilitation et aux organisateurs et à tous les participants dans ce webinaire.
Thank you. And Christelle, do you have any messages for us, please?
Well, I think the fact that this topic is now on the agenda, that there is a webinar about this topic, it's already a very, very good first start to keep on the discussions, because this topic is, a lot of time, it is not included in large land tenure programs. So I think it is good to have this webinar, to have this topic on the table. And my advice would also be, and specifically in these times where the traditional funds are uncertain, so to say, it's very good to keep this discussion ongoing in the countries and which model could work best for the situation. So keep on discussing it, and this webinar is a very good start. Thank you, Land Portal. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, Richard, for organizing this. And of course, all the people that are listening. So thank you for your attendance.
Thank you. There is a survey. If you click on the link, which Neil has posted in the chat, then you will be able to do the survey. We'd really appreciate the feedback. I'm going to ask just for two. I would like to echo the remarks of the panelists and thank everybody for participation and for the really interesting discussion. And what I'm struck is that there are very, very different approaches being used in different places and different starting points, but they all have a sort of common aim. So it's kind of interesting. And it suggests to me that this is something that's really important, and really we have to try to get a better handle on this and find a better way of dealing with it. So big thank you to everybody. Hema, would you like to make a closing remark?
Thanks, Richard. And maybe just very briefly to say that I agree with the panelists. I also learned a lot today, and it's really nice to see that there's a lot of interest in this topic. I'm open to explore how we can continue this conversation, and also making a bit of promotion for a World Bank session that we'll be having in Washington in May during the Land Conference, also on this topic. So everyone very welcome. Yeah, thanks for the engagement.
Thank you. And Neil, can I hand back to you? Because I think you've been hidden so far, but maybe you can say hello to everybody. And
hello, everybody.
This is the magician that made it happen today.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Thanks for a great webinar. Thanks for sharing, for everybody for joining and collaborating, participating. We'll make an attempt to see if we can respond to your questions, any unanswered questions. We don't always manage, but we'll give it a shot, and maybe we'll post that as a part of the actual webinar recap, which we will be publishing in the next few days. So thanks again. Look forward to continuing discussions. Stay tuned to the Land Portal.
Thank you very much, everybody. Wonderful to have had the chance to share today with you. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you all again.